Thank you, panelists, for your work that you're investing into CHC, your time and your professional expertise. We appreciate it. This is part of the process of making our courses effective for students and also for their students as they graduate into the classroom. This video is a video to enable you to more easily see how we've integrated core content and also navigation within Template 3.1. This is the Bachelor of Education and Bachelor of Arts Education Secondary. So this is the Template 3.1 document. Now, the whole navigation process is aided by hyperlinks and bookmarks. So I ask you to turn on the bookmarks. It's here, and you see all the core content and all the units on the left-hand side mentioned there. So scrolling down the information. First of all, our approach. We've used explicit language in the content descriptors and collective terminology thereafter in learning outcomes, assessments, and rubrics. Otherwise, we believe it would actually lack meaning if it was over explicit in every aspect of the document. Importantly, we've included any core content that is going to be verified is in the unit outline. The second part and the justification for this is the constructive alignment. And as education, we want the content to match the learning outcomes, assessment, and marking rubric. And so by putting explicit language in the content, therefore it will naturally flow. What we are talking about will be expressed in collective terminology throughout all the way to the marking rubric. And you'll see that pattern of information in the unit outlines clearly. Going on to the document itself, this is an example of core content 1.1. And we've noticed that when something is assessed for the purposes of Template 3.1, we've had excerpts from the unit outlines. So this one is novice and expert learners, and we see that content descriptor number 4, and specifically 4.4.4, has that explicit language as a demonstration. Now, because it's assessed and it's a critical assessment, we've then included the learning outcome, but also the assessment task that is relevant. And you'll see core content 1.1 is highlighted there as a code. However, it's a collective term, and the collective term in this instance is neuroscience. Now, that pattern is repeated underneath the assessed in the taught and practice columns. So here's an example of more further elaboration of the individual core content descriptors. And the difference between knowledge acquisition, for example, is highlighted there as part of content descriptor number 3. And it's got that, there's an error, it should be primary and secondary here. However, in a unit that is practice, we've only used assessment because they're subject to unit change and academic governance principles. So if a lecturer wants to make a change to this, they have to get approval by the faculty committee or the relevant teaching and learning committee. So that means that we've got a high degree of integrity in our view in this regard. Notice that we're looking at, for example, knowledge acquisition, a very explicit term. However, a collective term, neuroscience and learning and its application, is used in the assessment task descriptor. However, the content code follows that to highlight this assessment is going to address those aspects. Now, to verify that that's occurring, so we go to the unit code and name, and notice it's hyperlinked. So we click on there and we go straight to the unit. Scrolling down, there's information about the unit. Furthermore, its rationale, graduate attributes and course learning outcomes mapping. But an area of interest to panel is now in the learning outcomes. So if we have a look at what's relevant, for example, neuroscience theories and educational psychology is part of the learning outcome for this unit, but we've mapped, therefore, core content that are relevant to that learning outcome. This one's got Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives, and we have mapped 4.1, cultural aspects, and so on, 4.2. So every learning outcome is mapped against not only APSTs, but also the relevant core content descriptor. Moving down to the content, we see, however, when we're looking at neuroscience, for example, that there's a lot more information, and that corresponds to the excerpt that you saw in template 3.1, where cognitive load theory, knowledge acquisition, neuroplasticity are all elements of various core content descriptors, and therefore they are explicitly included here. Moving through the document, we're looking now at assessment. We indicated this, we're looking at assessment core content 1.1. And you notice that the collective term of neuroscience and the appropriate code is relevant to there, as knowledge mastery is relevant to 1.2, for example. Going through this document, this is an alignment of each assessment task with the APSTs and the relevant core content that is there. Assessments are elaborated, and they're elaborated, for example, of 1.1 is I have to respond and write a quiz to this on that information, and there it is to highlight the evidence and to be verified. Moving through the document further, we will find the readings here, which are relevant, and rubrics that are relevant. Sorry, here's a pause. Here's the overarching table of where a core content descriptor is in the content learning outcome and taught, practiced, and assessed for the purposes of template 3.1. Lastly is the rubric, and here's task number 2, for example, and it's indicating that we are assessing, as part of this criteria, these core content descriptors, and they are described by the collective term psychology and neuroscience in this instance, and they are mapped through the rubric. Now, I will therefore say, yep, I'm verifying that it is it's taught, it's practiced in this instance here. I now want to go back to my core content descriptor. I go back to my bookmark, click on there, I'm back at 1.1. So there is hyperlinking for content and units, and also you can look at particularly at a unit. This is one is on Indigenous education, and for example, you can go straight to the unit itself. To return to the template, you can go straight to the front page. So this is a way of hopefully you seeing how we've authentically integrated core content throughout our documentation, both within the template and the evidence that you'll find in the unit outline. Again, thank you for what you're doing and reviewing our coursework and making it as best it can for our students, as I said, and their students.